All right, thank you guys for joining us today. This is another one of our public health talks. Today we're going to talk about mental health and the silent epidemic of COVID-19. We have Stacy Braiuca today talking for us and with us. She is a 25-year master level licensed clinical social worker and a 10-year master level public health professional. She also calls herself a geek girl or digital diva, loving all things technology. She's a lifelong Kansas City, Missouri resident where she works from home as an adjunct instructor for ATSU in the College of Graduate Health Studies in the Public Health Department. She provides online therapy through betterhealth.com and serves entrepreneurs, coaches, authors, healers, wellness professionals, and businesses in her own business, coaching them on the use of technology to increase productivity. Similar to our previous talks, or in case you haven't joined us before, these are very informal. She's basically going to introduce the topic, talk a little bit about it, and we do encourage you to interact with our speaker. You can unmute your mic, because right now I have muted everybody to prevent feedback and extra noise. So you can unmute your mic and ask her questions at any time, or raise your hand and I can call on you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Stacy, I have you on mute as well. Sorry, you're going to have to unmute.
That girl doesn't pay attention to the tech, apparently. I missed being muted. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for thinking of me with this topic. Obviously, the last 6 months have been interesting for all of us in the public health arena, but as it started, I started finding it really, the intersections of my life became really interesting with mental health, COVID, and education, the education systems. I was already very busy in the online space, and I'm even busier in the online space now, as I'm sure all of you are. Obviously, many people who hadn't previously been in Zoom calls, et cetera, are now getting used to those. And those of us who teach online, we're used to that kind of thing. So it's like the rest of the world's, coming along with us for that part. So the intersections of those things have been very interesting to me. I did not prepare super formal things, so I will probably just comment on the topics as we go along, and I hope you guys have some great questions. I can give you just kind of my 30,000-foot view of where I'm sitting as a therapist, as an instructor, and as somebody who's been involved in the mental health space for that period of time, plus I don't say it's relearning epidemiology, but I've done a little bit of relearning of my epidemiology by watching the news. Is that not strange, because my focus in mental health in public health is actually the behavioral health side. So my epidemiology skills were a little bit rusty when this all started. So I personally, from the outset, knew that mental health was going to be kind of our second epidemic, if you will. And it is, I feel like it's still a silent piece of piece of the epidemic, or a silent epidemic, because all we're hearing about is COVID, 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 and about people being sick and dying, which obviously, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to worry about their physical health probably first, but mental health comes along a very quick second, of the person who might be sick, or people who may not even be around anybody sick. I think it's more of a global pandemic maybe than the virus itself because of that, because we're all impacted mental health wise. So I will have I'll have this PDF for you guys sent out. It just has our topics of that we're going to cover. So I'll go through them really quick, but then I'm going to just show you the other screenshots that I have in this PDF so that you can reference them and reference the sites they came from after we get done. So we're talking about how COVID has impacted mental health, exploring the impacts of public health issues on mental health, explore how COVID has impacted the mental health of the masses, how the pandemic has impacted mental health stigma, and how the mental health first aid program is a possible resource for ourselves and for the communities we work with, and review potential positive mental health impacts of COVID. I'm going to come back to this screen after I show you. Obviously, the World Health Organization has had, at least has information up on their website about mental health and COVID-19, with some information on basic psychosocial skills for responders, which I think we're all responders in this, especially as public health professionals. Whether we're responding in the field or whether we're, involved in contact tracing or whether we're involved in the research or teaching, involved in the stress our students deal with. I know the last block, I definitely had students that had at the least stressors related to the pandemic. The fact that we do not have investment, we don't think we had investment in the health systems. Our mental health systems have been slowly decimated since at least the early 70s. And that's just in the United States. I suspect, other countries and especially third world countries have nothing for a mental health system, even if they barely had a health system. They might with culturally, but they don't necessarily have a structured mental health system. So I just literally peeked at the World Health Organization site. CDC has several things up about mental health, about coping with the stress, taking care of your mental health. So they're at least talking about it on the website. I don't think that's translated to the news. I did find an interesting survey, however, the Household Pulse survey, where they're using the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2, which are two scales about mental health. So they are doing some research, some survey on mental health. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, especially comparing it to last year's data and see what the differences might be. One of the things we'll talk about is mental health first aid. And I noticed they do have a mental health first aid courses available virtually now. Mental health first aid courses and the trainer courses are available to anyone. I think as public health professionals, we need to really consider potentially becoming mental health first aid instructors or having a mental health first aid instructor in our organization so that they can then train Joe Q Public on being a mental health first aider. And I'll explain more about that when we get to the topic. Another great organization, in my opinion, is Mental Health America. They are an education and advocacy organization that's national. They also have a lot of local chapters. And so they have some good resources. They tend to be kind of the first ones out there on the news and various things when mental health comes up in a local area or nationally. So they usually have really good evidence-based information, but they're not a mental health agency as in providing therapy. They are an education and advocacy organization. So with that, I'm going to open the floor up on our topics. So, how COVID has impacted mental health. Has anyone seen that in either in their courses or just generally? I'd love to hear what you guys have seen where you're at.
I'll talk. So we've seen a lot of our students having a lot of higher needs, a lot more questions. A lot of them, since our students are primarily online, we've seen them needing more one-on-one Zoom sessions. Our faculty too have wanted more meetings, Zoom meetings. So we've done a lot more just informal meetings just to see how everybody's doing, making sure they're unplugging and how they're faring with things going on. A lot more of our faculty are having one-on-one Zoom meetings rather than the discussion boards to interact with the students, because they're having just small questions, but they're wanting longer delivered answers and things like that.
I personally experienced several of those things. And that reminds me actually of a lot of discussions I've had with people from the beginning of it, both in the therapy arena, not necessarily students, but just in general public arena. I've had a lot of people where I've had what I call the 3S's discussion. Is I think there are three things that were before COVID were underneath all of our chronic health problems in this country. And it's stress, sleep, and self-care. So we have not enough self-care, we don't get enough sleep, and we have too much stress. And those three silent S's were underneath our chronic, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, that those things were underneath all of our chronic health problems to begin with, but stress being one of them. And you add something like COVID on top of that, and it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's the one thing on top of everything else. And people can't put their finger on it to pinpoint why it is. They're either more angry or more frustrated, or they're angry at something, but they don't know what it is. And they can't tell, and that's what a lot of and the clients that I've dealt with from the therapy perspective, many of them have that perspective.
One of the things I've noticed with our public health in general, predominantly a lot of our faculty, both adjuncts and full-time, is they want to be heard about the little things. I think they find it really frustrating that the world is not listening to public health right now. The media, the press, administrators, and politicians are not listening and following public health recommendations. And so they know what's going to happen. They see what's going to happen from a public health and epidemiological perspective, and they find that very frustrating. And so they need to be heard on the little things. And so right now, as the department chair of public health, I find it very important to listen and pay attention to them on the little things, because deep down they're finding it very frustrating that the world's not listening on a larger scale. And so they need to be heard on the little things, because they're very antsy on the bigger things.
Mm-hmm. And I also find maybe just the support within our community as public health professionals, support with each other, similar, social workers. We have we have a concept, and I know that it happens in public health, but it's not as formal. We teach our social workers to use supervision. And when I say supervision, I don't mean your boss that's writing your paycheck. I mean to discuss cases, to discuss scenarios. And part of the function of that supervision is to take that frustration off, to be able to feel supported within your community, to kind of like what we're doing today even could be considered a form of group peer supervision. And when I came into the public health world, that's one of the things, the differences between the social work world and the public health world, I think. And we have a lot of similarities, but that's one of the differences that I don't think we don't teach how to use peer supervision. Maybe because mental health hasn't been one of the focuses, and I think supervision speaks to that, I guess.
We have a comment in the chat. It says, being isolated as working from home has created a need with many employees to just have some human contact in person. Not just seeing a face has created anxiety, depression, poor sleep, etc. with some employees.
Oh, Forrest, that's a brilliant comment. So many people who aren't people who work from home to begin with, those of us who already worked from home may or may not be dealing with that. A lot of my colleagues who already worked from home, they're like, things didn't change. I'm still doing the same thing I was doing 6 months ago. But even at that, sorry, on the screen thing here, even though some things haven't changed, other things have. I think for us is like, I hugged my mom a week and a half ago for the first time I had in the 4 months. The only person I had hugged other than that, the only person I've had physical contact with is my husband. Like, no one else I've had any kind of contact with other than seeing them on a Zoom call. So I think that does cause, it's like a loss. almost like it's like grief and loss, because you don't have them, even though they're there. And it's not something that person did, so you can't get angry at them. It's pinpointing who or what to be angry with, I think, somewhat, in that.
Go ahead, Don.
Or Mary-Katherine, I think most people have never understood public health before, and this was a really great opportunity for people to understand public health. And I think public health has done a really awful job and has really caused a lot of the stress that individuals have, because the messages keep changing. The symptom, the science changes, but CDC hasn't been very consistent. Perhaps some of that's political, but when you expect the experts to have the answers, and a week or two later that changes, that causes a lot of anxiety. I can tell you in Arizona, the public health department physician, head officer doesn't wear a face mask on the press conferences. So what does that kind of tell you about, like, what do I believe of public health? This is our expert. So I think we've done ourselves some damage here, and it has caused some of this anxiety among a lot of people. People don't know what to believe anymore. So
yeah,
I think we missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on that has caused our own anxiety, because those of us who are, maybe we're sitting as individuals screaming, but wait, this is why you need to whatever, but and we can't scream louder than the news cycle messages, whichever they may be, whether there's somebody saying that they're talking about CDC or WHO or a quote unquote public health response that's what the general public sees as a public health response, as opposed to us as individual public health practitioners.
And the public health response is different by state and by community. And so where's the science behind what it is, the response we're doing? And it causes a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of people, I think, that will probably never recover and will always be fearful of going out in public now. And I think that's a real shame. But there were people, introverts, that didn't want to go out in public anyway. This just gives them some more reason to do that. But I think it's scary for a lot of people, and justifiably so.
And not just introverts, but I'm familiar with at least one case of an individual who had panic attacks, as a diagnosis of panic attacks, had been well controlled on medication and behavior, and hadn't had a panic attack in over 10 years, and is now isolated at home, unemployed, terrified to go outside, literally just terrified to go even to go to the grocery store or anything. And they've got to go to the grocery store to get food. They're just plain terrified, and they don't know when or how they're going to be able to go back to work. Not because necessarily the work's not there, but because of their terror, because it has brought back this panic disorder into their lives in a major way.
Yeah. There's another comment in the chat that kind of goes along that. It says, agreed. I've seen both sides of the spectrum on that when speaking with students. Some are isolating alone and facing anxiety from lack of contact with others. Other students were isolating with their families and were overwhelmed with working from home, homeschooling children, and trying to keep up with their own coursework. Both needed self-care, but circumstances were completely different.
Yeah, and I think in a way, both that comment and Dawn's comment speak to the story I heard years ago, and I don't know where I heard it, but in fact, raise your hands, and if you go, where the participants thing is it says participants, and then you can do reactions and raise your hands or thumbs up or clap. If you've ever heard the phrase, if you've seen one public health department, you've seen just that, one public health department. Okay, so that speaks, one, to what Don was saying about each thing's different. Your local public health department's different. The ones that are next to each other are different. The CDC's different. And it kind of has made us look like we're not credible, even though we understand the differences and the reasons the nuances are there. Then we've got students that if you try and batch your students in one thing and say, hey, here's what our students are going to be stressed at, you can't do that, because one may be home, as a 20-something, they're home literally by themselves, have zero social other than maybe a Zoom call. They have zero physical socialization. And another may have like kids, spouses and kids competing for their computer time and their internet that they may or may not have to be able to do homework and forget time for socializing with each other, because you don't have that time. So,
Stacy, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this issue, because it seems to me that when you isolate, it's such an extreme that your reaction when you're no longer isolating is the other extreme. And I think of that when I think of these college students at the bars opened and they all just like had to go to the bar. They didn't social distance. They didn't wear masks.
Right.
It was like the extreme. They didn't sort of, slowly do it. There are people that have this pent up demand of one extreme, and then it's like, I'm done with it. I'm just going to do whatever, take the risk. And I'm curious.
And maybe not even saying take the risk, but some that don't even feel it is a risk. I don't know if it's the 20-something invincibility feeling, or if it's we didn't believe that it ever happened, that it's a big deal to begin with, like the conspiracy theory idea. I'm really not sure. And I don't know if it's if that's so much of the mental health thing, or if it's more of a reaction to not believing in the science. I don't know if I have a really good answer, Dawn. Not all.
There's a couple more comments too. It says not all introverts like the magnitude of isolation either. And then somebody else agrees.
Yeah, I think everybody has we're all on a continuum of introvert versus whatever. And everybody's in a different place of how much do you, and I think it's also a form of control of what you have control of, because an introvert might be an introvert in certain situations, but other times they're okay. If they can control how much socialization they have. And so some may go, oh, well, I'm okay as long as I can get on a Zoom call once in a while and talk to people, and I can go out and eat when I want to, or I can go whatever. And the fact of you like shut that one door where, maybe it's not so good to go out of the house. You've taken the control away from everyone, not just the introvert. But I think it comes back to taking that control away from us, or from the person being able to regulate their own socialization. What about just in general? And I think there's a big difference. We've got public health professionals in one spot. We've got people the general public in another, and we've each had different reactions mental health wise. I think Mary-Katherine, you spoke spot on to a lot of the frustrations we have as mental health people in the profession, and especially as instructors in the profession. But the mental health impacts on people who aren't in the profession and don't understand public health to begin with. What was the article, the young man who refused to get on the airplane the other day because he had to have a mask on, and I'm thinking of the mental health of everyone else on that plane. What if they would have let him on without that mask? What if somebody would have had a panic attack midair, or, who might not have ever had a panic attack in their life? I think incidents like that are happening all over the place too, and people are not realizing it's a panic attack. They're thinking it's just somebody getting angry, and they just need to be arrested. And we haven't even talked about or put the layer of protests and how it has increased maybe people's agitation on lots of things. That's a whole different discussion, I think, if we add that layer.
Hey, Stacy, we often talk about mental health as in like isolation and those kind of frustration, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But your last bullet I find kind of interesting, and I wonder if you would start us off on some of the positive mental health impacts of COVID, because right offhand I can't think of any.
Well, what about those who probably should have, like in our society, I found this interesting because we've started a family Zoom call every Sunday with our cousins in Scotland. And so we're comparing notes from the two continents, right? And it's been really interesting, the differences in things they do there versus here. And some of the things we've talked about overall is, they're talking about, they have Europe in general, they have more mandated vacation time than the US. So we have a lot of stress that's job stress in general, right? That impacts our mental health to begin with. And so what if a positive impact of COVID is the fact that we have been forced to slow down? What if a positive mental health is that we have been forced to look at potential ways of self-care? Not everyone, and not, but what if those are two that I can take off the top of my head?
Okay, we have a comment in the chat. It says, it seems to me that the uncertainty of everything contributed in the early days of the anxiety involved for many. And though most of the uncertainty has not resolved as yet, if there a function related to the duration of uncertainty that impacts one's response to it?
Oh man, that is so, I would say that you get close to things like, if you think about, the first thing that came into my mind was Stockholm syndrome, but not really that, but so much, not Stockholm syndrome itself, but when people are anxious over long periods of time, you start normalizing the fact that you're living under this stress. So I think about war-torn countries, places who deal with stress over long terms to begin with, and how it comes back in not only mental health problems but also additional physical health problems. We already have how much cortisol running through our bodies. Now we have it even more of it. We have this heightened level of fight, flight, or fawn or freeze, which are the 4 trauma responses. So we've got this trauma response that's ongoing. I think we saw a similar thing after 9/11, and did it ever fully go away? Maybe not. I mean, we obviously have never been the same since 9/11. Things eased, and we weren't as anxious to get on an airplane or as anxious to travel, or the just different things that it became normalized to go through lots of metal detectors. So what are the things that are going to come out of this and change from things we're anxious about, and over time the anxiety gets a little bit less, but we still have that little piece of it that's always going to be with us, because you can't unlive it. You can't unlive 9/11. You can't unlive the fact that is there another COVID waiting around the corner? And I think globally, or at least in many societies, we're going to carry those things. So I think we're going to continue to see mental health and mental health chemistry, physical health aspects. We're going to keep going in this, we're going to see that for quite a while. And I'm certainly not, I don't have the science behind it. I'm speaking today primarily from a anecdotal perspective of having, every Monday I do therapy sessions on BetterHelp with clients. And I was really worried at first whether that was going to be enough therapy versus an in-person therapy session. And I've been pleasantly and excited and surprised at the impact that it actually has. to have a telephone, and we could have video sessions, but they're primarily telephone, how the telephone sessions impact those clients. But I think the other reason is they also have text. They can text me later in the week. So it's like they have constant reassurance. And I think it also speaks similarly to what Mary-Katherine said about our students they just need more touches through the week. They need more reassurance. They may need a different kind or a video call, but they may also just need more little touches, more reassurances throughout the week or throughout the time that you work with them.
There's another question in the chat. It says, how do you think it will affect children in their mental health?
They are, thankfully, kids are so resilient. I think to an extent, they're going to be resilient and go, oh, well, this happened when I was a kid. And it was a thing, and everybody was scared for a while, and then we all got back to, whatever. And wearing a mask isn't unusual. So there's going to be things they normalize. But I think
a lot will depend on their parents too.
It depends on their family's reaction around them. But also I'm thinking it is going to impact their mental health. The reactions of the parents are going to impact, and people around them, close around them, are going to impact how they react and how they carry it forward. But I'm thinking of the ones who may be close somehow to somebody who either got really sick or passed away from COVID. And ones who, in some cases, like numbers of family members dying all at once. Obviously those people are going to be more outliers on the whole, that are having to they're literally dealing with trauma and early deep grief and loss. But I think it does go back to how their families react to it. But I do think they're very resilient. They tend to be more resilient, rather.
I just think about I have an 11-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I think about some of the 11-year-old's friend. You can probably hear him in the background, but I think about some of his friends from school, and when school was out, some of the parents would be like, oh darn, the kids are home, I can't wait till school starts. And those kids seem to be a lot more sad than the ones who are happy that the kids are home safe. But you can definitely see the difference in how the children are reacting with the parents.
I'd love to hear other folks' reactions that way, because I don't have my two kids, they're not impacted. They've both got 4 legs, and they're like, oh, Dad, when my husband was working from home, they're like, oh, Dad's home. Cool. Their reactions are very different.
In the chat that says, I worry they will internalize the fear they will pick up from adults.
That's certainly, because mental health, as any health concern or any health and wellness concern, is biopsychosocial and spiritual. There are those 4 aspects, at least, of any kind of mental health issue, any kind of physical health issue. You think of diabetes, there's biological pieces of it, there's psychological, cognitive and emotional feelings of it. There are social aspects of it, and there are spiritual aspects of it. Similarly, with something like anxiety, there are physical aspects of anxiety, at the least of which are the chemicals in our body that cause the different amounts. There are thinking and feeling pieces. There are social pieces of our anxiety, and there are spiritual pieces, and it impacts all of those things. And all of those things also, especially when you talk about when you talk about all of it, the intergenerational aspect of it. You've got DNA from the biological piece. You've got thinking and feelings, watching your parents or your grandparents, watching your family's reactions to things. You've got social, how that changes the interactions between people. Maybe mom and dad are at home working from home, and they're fighting more because they're working from home, and they're around each other, and they're stuck, and they're frustrated with, finances and with, everything. So people are and they don't have any outlet for that emotion as well. So yeah, they're soaking in that.
Now, to Brenda, I don't know how old your child is, but I have an 11-year-old with autism, and so he's very difficult with his emotions. He doesn't speak to them quite a bit. So with him, we do emotion coaching from the Gottman Institute, and so I can't just ask him if anxiety is bothering him or if is he scared, but rather I have to ask him, what were you most excited about today, or when did you feel scared today, or what excites you today, or what makes you feel better, because he tends to twirl his hair when he's nervous, and he's been doing that a lot, and he's very anxious about COVID. And with him, he's a numbers kid. He likes to know numbers. So every single day he wants to know the numbers, where they are, what's the death rate. I mean, he's a little epidemiologist at heart, but that has seemed to help him. And so I figured that out through the emotion coach and talking, but that's helped him quite a bit. So if you kind of go beat around the bush with, when were you excited? When were you most scared today? Things like that might seem to help. Sometimes a beat around the bush. The next comment in the chat is, the biggest issue with my 11-year-old is he wants to see his friends. We're now slowly allowing that if other parents are okay with that. But early on, it definitely impacted as he really missed them. Yeah. For sure.
And are people able to unmute themselves also, not just the chat?
Yeah, they can. Everybody can unmute themselves. Yeah.
Because I'd love to hear, more of the stories like that, and what you guys, maybe even helping each other with ideas on those things. Or what somebody else around you has done. Unfortunately, I don't have, like I said, I don't have the kid. I don't have the perspective from seeing what the kids are dealing with. I think when I come up with my notes, and I don't know why I didn't think of the kids. That was, What about? Has anybody thought of how the pandemic has impacted mental health stigma? Has anyone else seen that? At all in your observations? Personally, I think, like Dawn said, in the public health world, we had an opportunity when this came up to show ourselves as the experts we are, and on the larger sense, the larger organizations may have let us down as individual practitioners. So from the mental health perspective, I think we have a similar opportunity to have the fact that this is coming up as a natural, very large second pandemic, if you will. We have the opportunity to go, hey, see, it does impact all of us. And that way it's not as stigmatized as, well, those people or those people. And so I think, to me, it's like my hope that mental health stigma gets a little bit of a lift because of that.
I think more people are definitely talking about it, for sure, more openly as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not just those people. I think it's okay to say, hey, this big thing is stressing me out. It's like more okay to say that, and it's more okay to but I'm curious of other people who aren't in the mental health space. And you guys aren't directly in that. So I'm curious of what you're seeing about that.
My name is Steph, and I work with students on a one-on-one basis in learning and resource advising. And I see that unless I'm kind of pulling information out, my students have tended to recluse. So we have had to pull out, tricks to let's talk about mental health. Let's try, and we're trying to destigmatize just the need for help anyway in our field. Just, hey, come utilize us as a resource, as opposed to a request for help. But we have found that at least at the very beginning stages of the pandemic, that they've kind of reclused. They've kind of gotten in their shell and at home, and the social interaction that they're missing is a huge piece of the things that they're missing. And then a concern that I have going forward for them and for us as staff and faculty and people that are in the field are like a reverse culture shock. If we are expected to go, if and when we're expected to go back to work, and these students come back on campus, all of a sudden we're saying, okay, everything's okay. And there's kind of this untangible in many people's lives, this untangible piece of, okay, well, now what? Is it really okay to come back to campus? This kind of reverse culture shock.
It's like hesitancy to be with each other. Like, are you sure you're okay to be near? Or are you sure it's okay? Yeah. I've heard a couple people start talking about that of late. The ones who are still staying at home, but they're thinking, oh, I'd like to go out, but is it? And is it a specific, the students you work with, you say they're being reclusive. How would you describe can you describe that body of students again? The things that they come see you guys for?
Sure, they come see us for things like learning strategies, study skills, test taking skills. As pandemic started, we started to offer things like building at-home study spaces, time management, life-work balance, student life balance, just all types of things that are learning resource oriented.
So it wasn't a small subset of students, it was really for the whole general population of students.
Correct.
And that you feel like more students were still, just isolating and not looking at, not accessing the services to find out how they could help themselves with it?
Yes, at our services, and I think a little bit in the mental health services too, but, oftentimes just when I would reach out and ask for how everybody was doing, the biggest thing that I got is we are very, very missing the social pieces and kind of feeling like they're just left out there in the virtual world to themselves. So, we've had to regroup and redesign to let our students know that we are virtual, but we're still here for you. Kind of like what you were talking about earlier with just the touches, just continuing to make that happen.
Yeah. Little touches here and there, more frequent.
Yeah.
Just, hey, I'm here for you. I've actually noticed that from the, that's one thing I really appreciate about ATSU in general is their response to things like that. But I've noticed as an instructor that the response from Mary-Katherine specifically, from Dawn, I've noticed those touches to us as adjunct faculty of how you've responded to that, Mary-Katherine. And I think that has actually helped because I didn't feel like I was going to have a mental health reaction to the whole thing. It's like, oh, I know, I got this. But I'm also the first to admit I have an anxiety disorder to begin with. Okay, so I know I have it. And I'm not going to say that's not the case, but it's like, oh, I got this. I can, I'm a mental health and public health professional. I see what's coming down the pipe. I'm going to get myself prepared for it. I'm going to be ready. And so then when the reactions did hit, and they did they were a little later than other people's, I wasn't surprised because I'm like, hey, you're human. But I was surprised going, hey, wait a minute. I thought had all my ducks in a row, but I think some of the things that have helped were things like the different little touches, even though I haven't made it to as many of the Zoom extra meetings, knowing they were there. So it's almost, I have this relationship with my Xanax bottle. And I may be totally TMI here, but I have a relationship with my Xanax bottle that if I have pills in the bottle, I don't need the pills in the bottle. Does that make sense to anyone? So it's like, if I have that there and I know it's a resource that I can use if I have to, I know that I'm okay and I don't actually need it. I don't become as anxious. So that's just like and I've talked to clients who've had that similar thing. Because I also don't want to take them because I don't want to take too many of something like that. Right. But I have to know they're there. And I think knowing that the services that you're providing in the Learning Resources Center, maybe knowing they're there, some students are like, but I don't know that that's a direct, tie back to what you have, because the students may not realize what all the services are that are there,
You're correct about that. We
or
are
what
we are continuing to work on plans to on how to continue to get the word out about what we offer, and that's
it's the whole you
definitely
don't know what you don't know, and
correct. Yep.
until you find out what you didn't know thing. And maybe that's something I suspect as instructors, it's good for me to hear that as an instructor, going, oh, wait a minute, I need to remember that these things I need to remember to reiterate that to students. Hey, have you reached out to? Hey, do you know this service is available? Do you know that service is available? And I think reminders, yeah, I like the fact that just reminded me of that, so that it can be top of mind when I go to the classroom or go to the next course.
Even just one thing I noticed that I actually didn't think people would find helpful, that they actually said was helpful, as far as making that connection. I sent out a couple of links where they could work together on virtual puzzles, and I thought no one's going to do it. They don't have time. There's too much going on. And then I logged in the next day and the whole thing was done. And I was like, who did that? And multiple, I would say about 8 to 10 people had actually contributed to the puzzle. And they said it was just nice knowing that somebody was out there doing the puzzle with me. And it was something you could do asynchronously. And they were all just working on the puzzle at different times. And it had nothing to do with academics. It was just the fact that they had something to do together with another human on the other side. And you can see when somebody else is online, because there's a little hand moving puzzle pieces at the same time. But it was just that connection. They just had the connection. I really thought, seriously, they got enough things to do. They're not going to be doing a puzzle. And I did try to find something that looked a little public health related, but I just was almost comical to me, because that's the last thing I thought anyone would do. But I was trying to bring up morale a little bit. But
that sounds like a cool resource. Maybe we need a resource of social outlets, and not just for during COVID, but think about just in general how socialization and how that kind of lessens our anxiety in general, or how doing things, because it's a self-care thing, really. The puzzles could be a self-care thing.
Yeah, and then my son started some with his friends, and so they all had fun. Yeah, I'll share the resource where the puzzle was, but you can pick all different puzzles, and you can choose on the number of pieces you want. So he would pick smaller puzzles pieces for his friends, and I'd pick the hardest ones for the faculty to challenge them a bit. But I was trying to do lots of little things like that. I think I'll continue, because they actually really liked them. I was just trying to think outside the box on what things could I do to bring people together. And it was actually I actually got a lot of good feedback from those things.
What kinds of things, like words with friends, or, you don't
actually have to join. You can just click a link, because I didn't want to make people sign up for stuff. I just sent them the link.
Right.
And they got it and go.
Yeah, that's even better.
Yeah.
But, I think even if we weren't talking about COVID, if we're talking about mental health and downtime, if you're even, students who are working on homework, or those of us who are, faculty, as you're working on things, we need to have a better balance of that self-care versus what have you. And those are little things that, might be fun ways to not only have self-care, but also increase some fun socialization, but, what are the team building that they call it, between, not just necessarily even between faculty on same teams, but maybe I meet somebody who's faculty in a whole different area of whatever, if I'm playing the ATSU puzzle game.
Yeah, we do chess as well, and then Mexican loteria. So,
what's the last one?
Mexican loteria. It's where it's kind of like a bingo.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just realized what it was. Okay.
Can I piggyback off that idea of self-care, and see, actually, if others have recommendations or examples that they haven't been able to incorporate, what I would really like to do for my students moving forward in the fall is to provide these really easy ways to address self-care rather than, hey, you need to get enough sleep, you need to exercise, you know, I don't want to give them a list of things they can easily ignore, but a puzzle that they can readily engage with because it's fun. Like, you know, are there other ways to set it up in a way that it's enticing for them to actually participate in those activities, rather than just another list of things they have to do, right? To make sure they're watching out for themselves.
One thing I would do is potentially, and maybe I suspect there may be something available online somewhere, is like a self-care survey of what are the things you like to do. So like my form of self-care is very different than other people's forms of self-care, right? One form of my self-care is actually working on computer things. That actually is a relaxing thing for me because it's like a puzzle. But other people, it would cause immense stress, right? So I use that example to show that all of our forms of self-care are very different than each other. There's another form for me is watercolors. And so I leave watercolors on my desk all the time, or coloring books, one or the other, so that I can, you know, I even actually have been known to color while I've been in therapy sessions. And I'm still with the client, by the way. I'm still hearing them. But I think it's asking the group involved, what is your favorite form of self-care other than sleeping, watching movies, and playing computer games, you know, so that people think outside of the box. So in here, if you guys put in chat, what is your favorite form of self-care? What's something you do that you enjoy? It could be gardening. It could be coloring. It could, you know, what are some things you guys do? That hiking. Yeah. So being outside, and hiking and long walks are things that don't impact COVID, right? As long as you're you're social, you know, obviously we all know the social distancing. And I wonder if how many of those things that people have returned to because of COVID. Spa day at home, going, yeah. So you guys are coming up with great ones that you can do at home during this, crafting, painting. Oh my gosh, I wish I could read non-academic books without I have to have them on audio. Second run through grad school killed my ability to read text on a paper or screen. So I have to do audiobooks now. So my challenge to all of you is, one, make a list or get with a group of family members or group of friends, and everybody brainstorm types of things you can do that you do to relax. And it may be something, you know, completely odd. It may be something that other people don't do. One of mine used to be glass blowing. I mean, if I could get to my studio right now, I probably could. Random dance off. That's brilliant. See how many different things you can come up with for self-care among a group of people, because you may think of something that you used to do that you don't do anymore, or you may think of something that you want to try. Look up lists of hobbies. I know that sounds strange, but like lists of hobbies. And maybe seeing if I would start with the students that are in the group and say, you know, name the top 10 things you do that you enjoy, and don't call it self-care, because I have found people don't like the phrase self-care. So say top 10 things you enjoy outside of class that don't include computer games. You know, keep some of the main things out of the way, like shopping, doing your nails, sleeping, even though spa stuff is good, but you want people to go outside of that. An impromptu Nerf gun war. All right. I'll show you one of my desk toys. These are from the Purple Bed Company, and they fling across the room really well. And I was on the phone with the customer service people from them, and they said they literally do have wars inside their office with these. So how many things like that, like a Nerf gun war? Boxing, so like boxing, whether you have it, boxing stuff or even on the Wii. I used to enjoy boxing on the Wii. Ooh, impromptu floor is lava. Yeah, because you're never too old for that. So I want to challenge each of you to come up with 10 things. And I don't know, sadly, I don't know if there's a way we could, if you everybody sends Mary-Katherine your 10 things and we could come up with a combined list of all of our 10 things. If somebody would be willing to aggregate a list of.
Yeah, if y'all email them to me, I'll put them all together and we can send them out and come up with something
It'd be
fun
fun to
do.
find out like how many things are, you know, if everybody did 10 things, how many are the same, how many are different, and how you're taking care of yourself, because doing at least one thing at 5 minutes a day of self-care will
and
change.
Accountability is important. One of the things I sent out an email to all of our to our department, and I had them talking about unplugging, but I held them accountable, because I think unplugging is really important, because we're online, and it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm going to unplug. It's another to say I'm going to unplug and then have to be held accountable to it. So having to have an accountability partner changes everything. And so I would, constantly be on them about, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? Now, how did you do it? For how long? And what did you do? And I got a lot more different responses than just, yeah, I unplugged, So make sure you have accountability partners. So send me your list and we'll figure out a way.
It would require handcuffs and blindfolds for me. You'd have to show up with the handcuffs, Mary-Katherine, and like keep me away from all devices. But I don't disagree. I do think you need to unplug, definitely.
Yeah. But we are almost about out of time.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Does anybody have any last minute questions or comments or thoughts for Stacy? All right. Well, thank you very much. This session
love that, Bethany.
And the session on space were recorded and will be sent out by the President's office probably at the beginning of next week. We'll also send you the slides to this one, as well as the link to the puzzles. We're going to have a few weeks without these sessions for summer break, and then we will get back onto different sessions. My email's in there. Send us your list of ways to have fun and do hobbies, and we will compile that list for you as well. Also, any ideas of any public health talks that you would like to hear about, and we will get those scheduled as well. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Stacy. This has been great.
Thank you
very
again.
enjoyable and informative.
I have loved hearing from you guys what you're seeing. So.
All right. If you think of any other questions, feel free to send us an email and we'll get it to Stacy. Thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a good short summer. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.